Well, I'm Courtney Lopez.
And I'm David Lopez.
I work at Calvary. I'm the Student Ministries Administrative Assistant, and I've been on staff for 14 years.
And I work at Children's Hunger Fund in LA and used to work at Calvary.
And we've been married for 10 and a half years. So do you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. So the very first time, so David and I actually started dating when we were 20, but the first time I met him, I was 17 and you were maybe 18, maybe still 17. And it was our senior retreat, and I asked Dave to film a video because I knew that he did tech. And it was friends with his friends, but we weren't really friends. And I said, hey, film this video of me and my friend. And he was like, okay. And then he edited it for me. And we actually played it in high school ministry. It was really stupid. But through that, we actually ended up becoming really good friends.
And that kind of continued. And as we got older and into as we turned 20, we started dating. And really that kind of really our relationship came together through YA or what it was back then. And it was just a really good time of getting to know each other more and serving together. And through that, we developed much more of a bond.
Yeah. And actually before that, I was really good friends with Brian Williams, your young adults pastor, and he was really good friends with Dave. And so they would hang out all the time and play the video game Halo, and I liked Dave. And so I pretended like I liked Halo too. But I was really bad at it. And I didn't tell him until I think we were married. That's why I always played. But like through that relationship and our friendship, we became best friends before we started dating. And Dave actually was on staff, and he asked me to be his date to the Calvary Christmas party. This is, in 2004. And I really liked him. And so I got dressed up and I got my hair done and got a fancy outfit. And I came and met him at his house, and he went, wow.
Oh, like open mouth, just like, oh.
And he ended up asking me out that night, actually. And I said yes. And so it was pretty awesome. And we actually dated for a while before we got engaged. But we actually at one point broke up. And so my dad actually died 3 months into our relationship. And 20-year-old Dave and 20-year-old Courtney are very different than 36-year-old Dave and 36-year-old Courtney are now. And Dave was a lot more immature then. And I just was like, I can't do this. And if we get back together, we're going to get married. And so we broke up for a summer. And Dave tricked me into getting back together with him through a road trip to visit my best friend at the time and his brother. He paid for a date at the aquarium. Do you remember this?
Aquarium. Yeah.
Yeah. And we ended up starting to date again that next week. And I knew like God had put it on my heart that this is the man that I was going to marry and that he was the one for me. But that road wasn't totally easy. We had a lot of trial and error of who we were. We were becoming who we were because we were so young. And, I had a lot of stuff I was trying to figure out. I was still grieving for my dad. And, I had been told growing up that Dave had to be a certain way and that he had to be this certain man, this leader of a boyfriend, and he had to lead us in our relationship. But that wasn't Dave. And I didn't realize that there could be another way. And so we fought a lot.
Wow.
And one time a friend said, maybe it's you. And I started to realize, wow, that was a really bold thing to say to me. And she was right. And I realized like Dave is not going to be that leader, but he is a very strong leader. And I'm also a very strong leader. And so like we ended up starting leading each other in Christ instead of me saying like, why aren't you doing this? And our relationship became so much stronger. And do you have anything to say
that was
at this
good.
point of our relationship?
I think looking back and as we've been thinking over the last few days preparing for this, it's been really interesting to think about how difficult we made things on ourselves back then. And I've thought this, many times looking back at high school and being in my 20s and just how much more effort we put into stuff than needed to be, where we could have just let so many more things just be less passionate about I don't know, what we were going to eat for dinner or, you know, small things and large things where it was just a lot of stuff where, it just didn't matter. And I think we know much more now, certainly, that as long as we're together, we can do quite a bit, and we'll be happy and we'll work through it.
Yeah, I think we, at a very young age, thankfully, praise God, we realized how critical communication is in our marriage and our relationship. And, you know, after we kind of realized that and wrestled through that with us and our leadership with each other and bringing each other to God, our relationship has been so strong. And we got engaged in 2009, and we got married a year later. And, you know, looking back, like, even this past year, which has been the hardest year I think anybody on earth has gone through, I looked at him every week and would be like, I love you more than I did the first day I met you. You know, like I because we have such open communication and we are willing to say honest things to each other, but in a way that's loving and in grace and truth, and just to talk about things and to say, hey, you know, I'm so sorry I said that. It wasn't out of a place of love, or, hey, actually, when you did that, it kind of hurt me. And through that, like, we've been able to grow so much as leaders and as people. And I'm really thankful for that. You know, we both served as staff at Calvary for a while. And that was some hard times too. Like, being in ministry together is really hard. Schedules are really hard in ministry. And, you know, Dave ended up leaving Calvary so that, you know, we can have a little bit more bandwidth in our life, you know, and he still works in a nonprofit, a Christian nonprofit. But like, through that, like, time period, I think we grew a lot together as people. Mm-hmm. And, like, in our relationship with Christ too, I think really pushing each other to spend more time with God, and to also, you know, push each other to spend more time with God, like, intentionally, which was really cool. And, like, the last couple of years, we've actually done a Bible plan together, which I've really loved. And Dave, well, you know, his kind of style of loving me is saying, like, when I'm down or I'm distant from God, is to be like, hey, maybe you should do that, but, like, really gently and sweetly. And it's been really great for me.
Well, and that even goes both ways of, you know, there are many times, especially with work or something like that, where I'd just be stressed out. And the first thing Courtney say is like, oh, so what was it like when you prayed about that? Which of course I hadn't, because I was relying on myself or others to fix those things. And I think a lot with Courtney's prompting of just remembering to bring it to the Lord. And that's made such a big difference in just how to address things and kind of changing the understanding of how we deal with things, of really putting the Lord first, when, especially in those times where we don't want to, when we want to fix it, when we want to just kind of go forward, bullheaded, you know, through something, and just relying on bringing it back to the Lord, even if it's just getting a different view of it. That's really been something that's become a big shaping of our marriage.
I think something for us in the last couple of years too that's been really big for our relationship is in the fall of 2018, actually a month before the borderline shooting. Dave was actually diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And so he had always been struggling health-wise, you know, since he was young, with these issues. And, you know, I really pushed him, said, hey, like, I've known you since we were 20. This isn't normal for you. You need to go to a doctor. And wrestling through that, him getting diagnosed, I think, was like a really big breakthrough in his life and in mine too. And realizing how to love somebody who's dealing with a chronic illness and dealing with pain that I don't understand. It's forced me to learn how to be a more patient person. I think my inherent nature is to not be patient in those circumstances, even though I'm actually a very empathetic person. I struggle with being empathetic about that kind of pain for some reason. And, like, I'm very empathetic with, like, somebody who's gone through, like, the death of a loved one or emotional pain. But, like, when it's physical, I'm just like, I think it's how I was raised. Like, just get up and go on with it, you know. But it's forced me to step back and be like, no, how do I love you in a new way? And how do I love you in a way that honors God and loves you in the covenant that we made together in God? I think this year too, like, that's something we both wrestled through, like, with the pandemic, is stepping back and saying, no, I have to choose to not do that because of my family, because of the man I love. And I would do that 100 times over because it's worth it. Because he's my best friend. And, he was worth saying, no, I can't do everything. I'm going to sit in my house for a year and not do things. And,
Yeah. And the support of receiving that care, I think, I guess it really has been pretty amazing this last year.
Yeah.
Of just that support, and certainly me dealing with not feeling like I was worth someone going through all that trouble, and just being on the receiving side of someone saying, no, you are worth it. I'm going to support you and make the sacrifice for you, and getting to a place where I just had to be receiving of that, where there was nothing I could do really to make that any easier, just to receive it and try what little I could to help out more. And receiving all that support from Courtney and the sacrifices she went through, I think it was really difficult for me, because we'd always been taught as men in the church that you need to be strong. You need to be the provider and the supporter. You kind of need to be that one out in front, the one taking the lead. And it was a time where I just couldn't physically safely do that. I couldn't be the one that was leading our family in that way. And so it was kind of a vulnerable place to be. But I think, even through this disease, that's really kind of been the name of the game, is just vulnerability, of being open to, not put on a brave face all the time, to be able to receive Courtney's caring for me and to be able to share that with other people. And that was one of those kind of items where Courtney kind of led for me, of sharing my story with more people, even where I wasn't really comfortable with it. And we had some arguments about her sharing my story of my disease. Of course, it affected her a lot. I'm
all about vulnerability. So for me, I needed to process it that way. I needed to be able to talk about it.
Yep. And so pushing that to me really helped me to own it and do more with it and be more open about it. And it's been amazing how I don't think I ever would have moved out of that comfort zone without Courtney pushing me in this instance. And that's been able to now help so many other people, that God's used my story in that to inspire others, whether it's going to even just go check in with a doctor or be able to share something. And I think even that kind of more almost radical vulnerability, I think, just because it's so unusual for what we have these days, has really been received well. I mean, it's been powerful. It's been pretty amazing. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
I think for me too, this past year in particular, while it's the most difficult year I think we've had the best conversations that we've had in 16 years of knowing each other. And I'm really thankful for that, that time period of stretching us, being the only person I would see for weeks at a time, and I've always been a reader and a learner. And I think this year that became something Dave really loved, which I'm really thankful for because I'm an introvert and I love reading and I get filled up that way. And I've been like that since I've known him, since I was a teenager. And so for him to get into books and reading was yes, God, thank you. Because we've had the best conversations because of it. We've talked about so many different things that we wouldn't have talked about with our faith, and pushing each other and kind of, rethinking different things. And even with political climates and racial climates right now, being in a mixed race marriage of having hard conversations that we didn't have before, as much, and coming to each other and being I'm for you and I see you and I want to fight for you, and as a person who's married to a person of color and getting to have that richness in our relationship has been a real big blessing. We've been doing a Be the Bridge group as a couple with some people at Calvary, and it's been some of my favorite time in our relationship is going through that together and being able to talk about racial reconciliation after 16 years of knowing each other has been really cool and something I've really truly loved in the time we've been together.
I think some of that too is identifying our space or how we relate to others and our own identity in that, which is pretty wild that at this point we're still figuring out our identity. And it's something where I think to a much deeper level, we're figuring out our identity and how we exist with others and with other Christians and with God and each other. It's pretty amazing. So
I said I love you really early. I was not ready.
I'm a very emotional person. I'm a very trusting person. And so I think, I mean, it was probably 3 months maybe into our dating. I was like, I love you. I'm going to marry you. And she was like, there is no way you know that yet. She just didn't think it was possible. But it was, and I think, I mean, I don't remember. Did we have the conversation here in the atrium, I think?
Oh, yes. It was the stairs by the atrium.
Yes.
Because you were doing the, Calvary used to have these big Christmas plays, and Dave used to do sound back then, and you were running sound for it. And so like we started dating, and then you were like, I couldn't see you for like 2 weeks because you were doing this thing. Like we went on one date, and then it was like literally like I had to come see you during your break at the Christmas play to see you.
It was more than, was it just 2 weeks?
Maybe it was more than that. I don't know. But you told me one of the times I came to see you that you loved me, and I was like, oh.
I still stand by it.
I got to think about that.
Yeah. No, I was right. I knew it then. I knew it now.
Yeah.
Hasn't changed. Didn't stop at any point in there. But she was less trusting. So.
Well, some of that too is I had a pretty hard childhood, you know, like with my mom has mental illness, and you know, I grew up with a single, you know, we both grew up with single parents, but like love for me was really difficult. I hadn't been a Christian that long. I'd only been a Christian a couple of years when we started dating, 2 years. And so like for me, I was still trying to figure out my faith and like what I believed about Christ, and trying to figure out like heal from, you know, the pain of my childhood and my dad, you know, relationship with my dad and my mom. And, but you know, I knew that not that long after. So I actually know that the moment I knew that I wanted to marry you was when you tricked me to go up to the Bay Area to visit our friends. And we were driving back from the Monterey Bay Aquarium in Dave's really old, janky BMW. He wouldn't let me drive, even though my car was nicer. And we had the windows down, and we were driving down the one, and the sun was setting. And I looked over at him, and I like knew then, like I was like, I'm going to marry this man on that drive specifically. So I think some of it was we were pretty young still. You know, I was 21 when I knew I wanted to marry Dave. We were both 21. And, you know, I wasn't ready yet. Like I was really happy dating and like kind of having the freedom of dating. Like I really loved that. And then also like we had some debt that I wasn't really willing to get married with quite yet. And so we wanted to work towards getting that kind of paid off so we could start our relationship really well. And not have to have the stress of like that financial stuff like living behind us. And so we kind of worked towards that together and kind of made plans. And then, you know, we just kind of got to the point where we're like, okay, we're ready. Like, you know, we've been together for just 5 years, and I had started planning our wedding because I was like, I know, you know, we're going to get married in the next year. And the place we wanted to get married at was already booked for a year. And so I was like, let's go look. And that's when we got engaged. But,
yeah. And I decided if we're going to go do this, I better make it official. I believe you gave me an ultimatum too a while back that if we're not engaged by our 5-year dating anniversary, I'm going to leave you.
I didn't say that. No.
You said something along those lines. You said something along those lines.
It wasn't like that.
It was close to that.
No.
But I mean, it was true. It was that another, you know, instance of me needing a push. And so I think I was traveling on a work trip and arranged getting the ring. And so that when we did go on that, I was able to propose while we did that, looking at our wedding venue. And it was great.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of it too is that we just really enjoyed dating. You certainly enjoyed it because I paid for everything.
Yeah, it was nice. Well, you still pay for everything because we have a joint bank account.
Yeah. Well, now we pay.
Yeah.
I think that's a big difference. But yeah, we just really enjoyed dating. I mean, we had a blast, and I think something we didn't realize is how much we would enjoy being married. We knew we would. We just didn't know to what level. And that was something that, we still continue to realize how much we enjoy.
Yeah, I think some of why I wanted to wait a little bit too is we had some friends that got married really young that we were in young adults ministry with that were already divorced by that point. And that I wanted to be sure, I wanted to go in the commitment. Like, I knew that this is the man that God wanted me to marry and that who I wanted to marry. But I really wanted us to be ready for it. I didn't want to go into that commitment not being sure and not having, a firmer foundation of our relationship. And I'm glad we waited, honestly. I'm glad we waited that 5 years because I think our marriage is stronger because of it. I'm thankful that we learned from the example of people we knew and loved who didn't last, which is a bummer.
Yeah. I think less you because you had much more responsibility and had to have more responsibility. But for me, 21-year-old, 22-year-old me was very immature and did a lot of dumb stuff. And I think it's really good and healthy that didn't happen earlier because I don't know how well we would have held up not having enough maturity or me having enough maturity to be able to have constructive arguments and not take it overly personal or understand that if we were having an argument that was personal, that there was more going on, that there was something else that was driving some of that, not just how can you play so much time playing Halo, but more along lines of I'm really struggling with something right now, but I'm going to bug you about playing Halo because of it.
Yeah. I always try to talk about our marriage in front of high school students on purpose because I think it's really important for them to see the healthy marriage, to see a really good example of good Christian-based godly marriage.
And what could be a better example than that?
So I'm excited to do this. Yep.
I think too, leaning more towards the more egalitarian side, which is less popular in some circles in Christianity, but certainly alive and well in others, really opens up a lot of people's eyes to oh, there's a difference, or that's a thing, or what is that word you just said? And yeah, works well for us.
Yep.
I know complementarianism works really, really well for a lot of people, and that's great. But I think there's other people like us that would probably save a lot of headache knowing that that doesn't have to be, the evangelical prescribed way.
Yeah. When we were in high school and in college too, when we were in young adult ministry, there was a whole big push of this is how relationships should be. And there was a lot of books at the time. Dave didn't read this book, but a lot of women read it.
Didn't read.
Yeah. But there was this book that was all about dating and, men and women in marriage. And that formed a lot of my view of what dating was. And there was a lot of conversations about you should make lists of the guys that, the qualities of guys that you want and all these things. And so going into a relationship, I had these preconceived notions of stuff that I had been taught that didn't necessarily end up being how our relationship works. And so we really struggled with it for probably the first year that we dated, I would say. It's kind of maybe by the second year is kind of when we really worked it out. But I am a really strong leader, and Dave is a really strong leader as well, but in different ways. And I thought that he had to fit in this mold that said, you have to be the leader of the household, and you as a man have to lead this woman. But that's not Dave, and he's not going to ever do that. He is, but in a different way. And we would fight about it because I'd be like, why can't you do this? Like, people told me this is how you're supposed to be, and you're not this. And, I realized that there is another way, and that, in the Bible, when it talks about marriage, it also talks about women, coming to the man, and men and women leading each other. And I realized, that that's okay too. There's like spine issues and rib issues in the Bible. And I think that, this is kind of like a rib issue. Spine issue is like, we believe Jesus rose from the dead and came back 3 days later. But like, this is, this is like, it's not as talked about as it used to be when we were dating. It was a really big deal when we were dating. And, I'm kind of thankful that it's not a big thing anymore. But I wish this was talked about more when we were dating, and that people could realize like there's another way to have marriage and to come to each other and lead each other to Christ, and bring things to the table when one person is feeling lower in their faith, or to be like, oh, I was doing this, like, how cool, like, or like God led me through this, and to both do that with each other. I know our relationship is blossomed when we realize that this is our leadership style.
Yeah, I think, for us too, what we'd often find is that it seemed kind of like almost like a waste of resources for one of us to always have to be the dominant leader. And even that word dominant and dominate is just such a, I don't like it. But I think that's what I had been taught growing up in the church, as like, it is my job to put my foot down, to control the situation, to always be the leader. And I think that works in a very male-dominated culture, but at the same time, that's not really what we see how Jesus leads. Isn't leading by dominating people. He leads much more by caring people and supporting them. And so I think it's just kind of we had some, I think, just some poor representation. Growing up with single parents too, we also, neither of us had a really good, close example of what God intended for marriage. I didn't have any example because my parents weren't Christians. I didn't grow up in a Christian home too. Yeah.
So for me, my only examples of marriage were non-faith-based too.
I think, yeah. And we were never, we had a few friends where we could see how their parents interacted, but we were never around enough to really absorb some of that. And they, like everyone, they had plenty of their own problems too. And so that was something that was difficult when we went to figure out what our marriage was going to look like, not having that strong foundation to build off of, other than just we've read some books with some people's opinions that didn't pan out even for the people that wrote that. I think it was one of those things where the culture was turning to fallible people for a lot of their marriage advice or how they were going to structure their relationships, as opposed to turning to the Bible.
What a thought.
Yeah, what a concept. And so they were, the popular thing when we were younger was really looking at these examples of these very conservative, very strict guidelines. And that's kind of what we had as a starting point. But yeah, we just found, as we've said before, like that just didn't fit us. It didn't fit how God created us. As a strong leader and a reluctant leader, to be able to work together efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, both of us come from parents who have been divorced or married multiple times. My dad was married twice. The second time was to my mom. And my mom is bipolar. And so growing up in the 7th grade, my mom was actually taken out of my home for her safety and my safety. And, for me, I was still really wrestling with that, I think, when we started dating and coming to grips with my relationship with my mom, and also just like my relationship with God in that, and kind of wrestling with God with that. And so, for a while, I when I was really younger, I kind of blamed myself before I knew God. And then I realized like that's not true. Like, it wasn't my fault. My mom wasn't bipolar until she was pregnant with me. And so I brought a lot of that guilt into my teenage years, and I was still kind of wrestling with that when we started dating. And then for me going into marriage too, Dave's dad in particular's relationships have been quite dysfunctional. And so I really struggled with that in terms of Dave, of like being worried and fearful that he would bring that dysfunction into our relationship. And that was my biggest fear going into our marriage, was like, your example of a godly man is not what I want you to be. And it's not what what if this happens to us, and what if you become that person? And God really thankfully put on my heart that Dave is never going to be that man. Like, he's so far from that. And so he helped me see clearly that it was like, no, Dave is not, he wouldn't do that to you. Like, he's not that person.
I think for me, I was thinking about this question. What I brought into the marriage was myself, which back then I thought I was hot stuff, of course. But now, like, looking back, like, I mean, just immature. Even when we got married, there was still a lot of maturity things. I hope in another 16 years we'll look back and be like, well, we were so immature at 36. Because I think a lot of what I brought in was I was still in my 20s. 20s are a fun time, but you're probably not the best version of yourself. I hope not. I hope you're still building and growing and becoming more who God wants you to be. And so I think I brought in a lot just on my own, that I wasn't confident in who I was. I didn't understand. I had this misrepresentation of what fathers were supposed to be like and husbands, because, as you said, because my father wasn't real involved in my life. He was close, but not a great example of a leadership. One time he told me, I can tell you what not to do because I've done those things, but I can't necessarily tell you what to do. Which even just him telling me that was good to know. Is kind of, I think that was a big relief for me, is that, oh yeah, this isn't a good person for me to set as an example of who I want to be. Because he had admitted that, I haven't done this well. And, I would say, looking back at him, 65 years old now, he is much more mature than he was at 50 years old. And certainly in his 30s. So I would hope I continue in that trajectory, but hopefully starting off a little bit better spot.
I think we've just worked really hard as to figure out how to work at a good example of what marriage is, and constantly communicating with each other and constantly fighting for that. Marriage is a lot of work, but it's really amazing. It's both. And, you don't have a healthy marriage without really good communication and without being vulnerable with each other and without pushing each other to be the best versions of yourself and also to be closer to God. Marriage can easily become God. It could easily become an idol. And so to fight to not make that an idol is, I think, been really important in our relationship and wrestling with the issues that we brought into marriage. And, I think that God quickly took those issues away from us because we did fight for it. And we did fight to constantly bring each other to Christ, but also push each other to be better people and to live and love like Jesus, hopefully all the time, and even when we have disagreements, to try to do that in a disagreement in a way that's not going to hurt the other person intentionally, or you can easily have an argument where you can go at the other person and hurt them. Like in marriage, how to do that, but to fight to not do that is a really big thing. And to be able to say, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking right now because I know how much it's going to hurt you. And then instead say, no, I'm going to hold my tongue like James tells me to do,
Yeah, I think it just comes from working at it, being aware of the issues, taking the time to sit and think and reflect about what our marriage is, and kind of evaluating both ourselves and each other and where we are together, and then making choices that lead toward that being better, or certainly holding back. We have more ammo than anyone has ever had to be able to wound each other, and not using that is so crucial. I think some of that comes with maturity. We would say some pretty hurtful things to each other when we were younger, and we've gotten much more to understanding that, knowing those weaknesses instead of being angry and pointing them out. Now we understand them and support those things, knowing that that's where our weaknesses are. Looking at our legacy, I think this is some of it. I'm so honored that we were asked to be able to share our marriage. I don't necessarily always think of it as like a shining example. Not that saying that you are saying we're a shining example, but just being open to how God would use our marriage. At this point, we haven't had children, but we have Courtney and myself. We've really lived in our marriage in service. And I would hope, regardless of whether we have children, that we affect the lives of many young people, and being able to use the example of our marriage and just our efforts to be able to have that be something that enriches people. I think to someone like Rick Fusilier, who is someone I very much look up to, and
who doesn't?
Yeah. And
he's great.
And just how he's spoken into our marriage. I would, in my 60s and 70s, I hope I get the opportunity to speak into other young people's marriages and lives, and be able to enrich that in ways that, I think with Rick, he's just said compliments, nice things. He's a nice person. And so I don't know how much he really believes in all this stuff, or if he's just wonderful. And so you just feel that from him. But it sure has made a difference in my life. And I would love for our marriage and how we act and represent ourselves and Christ continue on some of those in the role that other people have put into us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the legacy that I would like to see is that people looked at us and said, we lived in love like Jesus. Like those people loved Jesus, and that they made each other better in Jesus. And also just like that people could see Jesus through our marriage and through our relationship. Dave mentioned that we don't have kids yet. Like we do want to have kids, but we actually really want to adopt or foster kids. Like we don't want to have our own kids. I've actually wanted to foster or adopt since I was a teenager. And, we aren't there yet, but we're going to be in the next couple of years probably, and I would love to have like part of our legacy be like we got to love kids that needed that love at that time, and that we got to be those people who got to show them Jesus in a really healthy way. And they got to have a stable home because of us. And they got to see Jesus through these two people I got to live with for this time period before I went back to my family, or, however it ends up being, and, whoever God would bring into our home. I think a big thing I've learned in our relationship of marriage in particular is like fight for your marriage. Fight for your family and fight for that time together. We had many years in ministry where Dave was working 6 days a week and we didn't have days off together. And that was really hard. And we had to really fight through that time period of like, okay, we have to be really intentional about how we spend time together. And through that season, like it's carried on to where we've been more intentional about like our time together and doing things that we love together and making our Sabbath a time where we're filling up our cups in things that we both love. And I think our lives are so much richer because of that, because we fought for it.
I would say continue working on yourself. I think for a long time, I thought I wanted to work on myself up to being able to be married, being that husband. but it goes so much more beyond that. I think had I stopped there, like we've seen friends that have kind of just stopped their personal maturity at some point, and they just kind of have been the 20-year-old version of themselves for far too long, myself included, I think, so I think continue to work on yourself, continue to work on yourself, continue to let God build you into someone better. You can always be a better version of yourself for your spouse and for God. Yeah.
And I think always trying to push each other towards Jesus, I think is the biggest part of marriage, honestly, and faith-based marriage, of making sure that you're both pursuing Jesus more than you're pursuing each other, especially even in dating. I think that really, like, a dating relationship can, like, if you're single and you don't have one, like, can easily become an idol of, like, what you want to achieve. Like, I wish I had that. Like, I want to only pray for that, or I really would love that to be my life. And instead of kind of waiting on the timing for the right person to come into your life, Dave came into my life when I wasn't even looking for it. And so, he liked me actually probably 6 months before I even thought of liking him. Like, people will come into your life at the right time, and don't stress out about it. It's okay to be single, and it's okay to pursue God in singleness, and it's okay to pursue God with another person. But just pursue God. Don't stop.
And enjoy being single. It's a lot of fun. You can do a lot of dumb things you don't get to do when you have to share your bank account with someone.
That's true.
That's very true.
Yeah, being an adult sucks sometimes. Like,
yeah, we got a house. We can't go anywhere. We got dogs.
We had to buy new tires for his car this weekend. So expensive, marriage.
No fun. Yeah.
I would like to say, pursue godly relationships. This series isn't just about dating. It's like about all relationships, and pursue the relationships that push you to Christ, not like push you away from it. And find those people that are like for you, that are like your champion, who give you grace and give you love, and like see the best in you, and like don't make you the worst version of yourself.
Find a younger version of Brian Williams.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.